Hip shifting is a term that loosely applies to getting the pelvis to move over a fixed femur. And by that, I simply mean closed chain. So closed chain is when we have a fixed point. So you can think of like a push up where both of your hands are on the ground versus an overhead press. Okay, so a push up is closed chain and overhead press is open chain. Whenever we are doing hip shifting, we're going to be in a closed chain. We want the femur to stay fixed and then the pelvis is going to move over the femur. The reason why we like hip shifting is a good thing to become aware of, to understand, is because it's going to help us to create a little more space in the back of the pelvis. A lot of times we can get really tight back here and that tends to lead to a little more loss of mobility at the actual hip itself as well. So by using this hip shifting, we can kind of get a little more length in the glutes, a little more length in the posterior pelvic floor. It takes the actual pelvic floor through some ranges of motion as well. So there's just a whole lot of goodness going on. And if you've ever been like, oh my God, like one side of my SI joint, like always feels tight, hip shifting can help a lot with that as well. So just having tools that we know can help our body to move better is super powerful. Hip shifting is one of those. All right, so for this, I am going to teach you using a yoga block. So go grab one of those and then meet me back here. I think when we first start to talk about this, it's important to understand what it is not, okay? So hip shifting is not hiking your hip, okay? Hiking your hip refers to it moving up and down, and I like to think of hiking as moving the hip closer to the rib cage, okay? At no point when we do a hip shift should our hip or pelvis come closer to our rib cage, okay? So we're not hiking at all when we're hip shifting. We're thinking about creating more space. If you think from the middle of your glutes to the actual side of your hip, okay? So from the middle to the side, we're thinking about getting more length in that area of the glute of the hip instead of just hiking the hip up. You're going to grab your yoga block and we are going to do a left hip shift first, okay? So we're going to be in a bear position, just in an all fours position on the ground. Now from here, you're going to put your left knee on the block. I want you to take your hands and they are going to frame the block. You don't need to have your hands off to one side. It will not feel right, okay? So the block is right here and then I'm basically going to take my hands and now the block is in the middle of my hands. If my kind of looking down this direction right here, the block is right here, my hands are framing the block. Now from here, I'm going to put all of my weight on the block, okay? So all of my weight is on my left side. I want to make sure that my foot on the left is not coming in nor going out, okay? That's really important. Make sure that you've got that foot directly behind your knee, and you may have to kind of like look around and check and see. We want the shin to be vertical behind the knee as well. Now from here, you may have already hiked your hip. You may be here and like, oh, my hip is already coming up towards my ribs. So if that's you, get that hip down. Find some length in between your rib cage and your pelvis. If you're not sure if it's you, figure out, can you kind of let your hip come down? And we want to think about the hip staying right on top of the knee, okay? So we've got some space in between the rib cage and the pelvis, and the hip is right on top of the knee. Now, the next thing that's going to happen is your right knee should be off of the ground right now, but you have all of your weight on your left side. You've unhiked your left hip. Now, what I want you to do is, without letting your left hip come up or your whole entire body rock over, you're going to drop your right knee down. This is harder than it looks. I don't want you to let your body lean to the side, and I also don't want you to hike your left hip up to get your right knee down, okay? You should be able to keep your left hip down and away from your rib cage. You should be able to keep your hip over your knee. Your foot should be behind your knee, and then you're going to let that right knee come down without shifting your weight over to the right side. If you're doing this right, you're gonna feel a stretch in this part of your glutes right here. Okay, now I'm gonna try not to do it on one arm anymore. That's really hard. Okay, so we've let the left hip come down. My right knee has come gently forward. I just don't have it like way back here, okay? So it's kind of in line a little tiny bit forward of the left knee. I'm gonna make sure that left hip is over my left knee, okay? You might need to adjust your setup, that's fine. Foot is in line with the knee, hip is on top of the knee. Now I'm gonna let that right knee come down without leaning over to the right. And now I'm gonna pick it back up, and then I'm gonna let it come back down again. You may notice yourself kind of shifting backwards and then get your weight more forward, okay? So we don't wanna shift back as we're doing this either, because that can be a tendency as well. So you're just gonna go through that motion right there. And once you feel good about getting that nice hip shift, you can let that right knee stay down, but you're not moving your weight over to that side, and you can breathe here. You should be able to feel kind of inside of that left part of your pelvis letting go. So this is making sure that we can have that really nice reciprocal motion at the pelvis. Is helping us to train some of that, because we want one side of the pelvis to be able to move independently of the other. And that's what we're doing with this. All right, so that is your hip shift. And once you learn how to do this, you can do it pretty quickly. It won't take this long every single time, and you'll be able to tell like, oh wow, like my hips are really sticky today. And so you'll know, oh, okay, like I may need to do a little more hip shifts, or you know, like the left side of your hip or pelvis always tends to feel a little more stuck, then you can use a left hip shift a little bit more. All right, so hip shifts, try it out, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.